Well, good. That's great news. It's great news that you can't escape because you're never going to get to your anchor thought. You're never going to get that big hug from your family if you jump out of the fucking plane.
Hey everybody, before we start the show, I want to make a couple disclaimers. This show does cover a wide variety of topics related to mental health and life in general, and some of those could be sensitive for you. I want to simultaneously encourage you to be brave in consuming difficult content, but also respect and recognize your limitations. So please use your best judgment. I will never be offended if you need to skip a question or an episode entirely, but feel free to feel it out, check out the episode, and just see what happens. If you need to skip, that's okay, but feel free to give it a shot first. I also need to say that while I am a psychologist, I'm not your psychologist, and I'm not your therapist. This is not intended to be direct medical advice, and you should not use this as a substitute for professional help. So with those said, let's go ahead and get into the show.
All right. Hello, friends of all varieties. This is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast, episode 368. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff, aka Duff the Psych. I make mental health content for real people just like you. And today we're doing just a deep dive on one question. I figured this would be a good week to do that. There's no, ads or anything, so I can kind of just roll through. It'll be probably pretty short and sweet, but I got a really good question that I think a lot of people could benefit from hearing an answer to. I think I've probably talked about this here and there on the show, but I'm not sure if I've done a full dedicated episode to it. So why don't I just jump in? I'll read the question and then I'll go through and, give my best answer to it. So the question reads, "Hi Robert, I read your book, Fuck Anxiety, a few years back and I found myself reading it again since my anxiety has reared its ugly head. I had a panic attack recently, which has now given me a panic phobia, in particular of a 3-hour flight I have coming up next month. I've flown many times before and have never had any issues, but for some reason this is sticking and instead of looking forward to the trip, I'm constantly worrying about it. Hence why I think I had the recent panic attack. Now I've had that panic attack, it's got me even more worried to the point that I want to avoid the trip altogether. The trip is to visit family and friends, which I think would be very beneficial for my mental health. I think I would be somewhat okay if I was doing it on my own, but I'm doing it with my 2 kids, toddler and baby, and the thought of knowing I need to keep it together as they need me makes it all the more stressful. I've been listening to your podcast and I think they're great. I'm hoping the tools you provided in your books and podcasts help me out and give me the confidence I need to get this done without being scared of having a panic attack on board. However, any advice you can give around flying alone with dependence and the fear of panic attack while being on the plane, confined space that you can't get out of, would be greatly appreciated." So thank you for the question, and thank you for revisiting the book. I appreciate that, and I'm glad that, the book and the podcast has played a role in your anxiety journey. I'm honored. What you talked about is a very, common pattern, right? So there's this anticipation and fear of potentially having a panic attack, and that fear itself and that anticipation itself is the thing that makes you feel panicky. That's sort of the root of what we call panic disorder. Now, I'm not saying that you have panic disorder in particular because that would require more of a thorough sort of evaluation and diagnosis. But in this case, this is the same sort of loop that you get into when you have panic disorder. I think it's totally normal also for anxiety issues that were once well managed and under control to suddenly rear their heads again. Even, simply the fact that you have kids and you're not on your own, that could be the trigger that's making this feel different. So it is totally normal. It doesn't mean that you failed or anything like that. This is normal for it to come up again in a different way. You're pointing out one of the interesting things, though, about anxiety and panic, which is that sometimes they happen just because they happen, right? There isn't always some sort of deep reason stemming back to childhood. It's like, why are you afraid of death? It's like, no, your body got elevated about something. You had kind of a sudden, realization. I'm putting that in air quotes, sudden realization or a thought, some sort of catastrophic thought. And that worked you up. You got that fear response and your body latched onto that reaction and built a strong association to it. So now you're just fearing the anxiety itself, which is, lovely, fun stuff, right? So the first thing to do is have some grace with yourself. Realize that just because you had panic rear its head again, it doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. It doesn't mean that you're doomed to struggle with this forever. We can get you through this. You're already revisiting the book, which means that you probably are aware that panic and anxiety themselves are not dangerous. You could have a 3-hour panic attack through the entire flight, and you would still be okay. You wouldn't be harmed by that. You'd be exhausted. You wouldn't be in a great mood. You'd probably have a headache and upset stomach and whatever, but you'd be okay. Panic won't hurt you. But that's not going to happen. It's very, very, very unlikely. Your body has to put a lot of effort into panicking, right? So panic attacks are an elevation of your body's sympathetic nervous system, meaning your fight or flight response. And that takes a lot of effort from your body. If you go onto my Instagram, I recently posted some infographics about psychology, and one of them is general adaptation syndrome, or GAS, whatever you want to call it. And it's just a simple graph that shows how, when we have a stressor, our body reacts to it by, increasing our sympathetic nervous system, having that fight, flight, flee, fawn, whatever, that response. And then it gets exhausted and it sort of has to come back down. So because of that, most panic attacks last between 5 and 20 minutes at the high end. There can certainly be longer ones for certain people, especially if there are underlying medical issues or other things that are influencing it. But for the most part, they're relatively short. Feels like forever. It feels like fucking a long time when you're in it. But usually panic attacks reach their peak of intensity at about 10 minutes. But your body really, really, really wants to be in homeostasis. It wants to come back to that even playing field. And our bodies are great at adapting to things. So it's not going to let you, for the most part, panic for hours on end, right? You might have recurrent panic attacks and kind of come up and down, but your body's always going to want to return to baseline, and it's going to try to do that. So all of this is to say that even if you did absolutely nothing, you did no prep work, you just got on the plane and strapped yourself in, your body will work itself out and you would be able to get through the flight safely. But we don't want that, right? We don't want you, we don't want to have to like hog tie you and throw you in there. We want you to get through this in a way that doesn't feel like torture. So what can we do about it? One thing is that flying anxiety and even legitimate phobias of flying are so common. Really, really common. One of the most common fears. Because it makes sense, right? Just, theoretically, when you think about what it is, flying can seem kind of scary. So because it's so common, there are tons of resources out there. If you were to search on YouTube, on a podcast player, a book website like Kindle, or even just Google it, there are so many tips, so many blog posts, so many videos, so much stuff out there, which is great. So I would take the advice here that I'm giving you and also seek out some other resources, and you can pick and choose the things that are most applicable for you. Now, one technique that I think is super relevant to your particular situation for this upcoming trip is what you call an anchor thought. Anchor, like the thing you put in the ocean. Now, this isn't a term that I created. I didn't make this one up, but I think it's a really great term. An anchor thought is a specific thought of something that you're looking forward to and excited about, and in this case specifically on the other side of the flight. So when you get there, or even when you get home, but let's say when you get there because it's kind of more relevant, what are you really excited for? So in this case, you're going on a trip to see family and friends. So take some time and think, what would be a great anchor thought? Something that you're really looking forward to. And try to make this something that you can see in your mind. So if somebody's picking you up from the airport, maybe it's that friend or family member having a huge smile when they see you and the kids and giving all of you guys a hug, maybe a big group hug or something. Maybe it's the first time they're seeing your baby and they're like, oh my God, look at them. They're so cute. Maybe it's the way that your toddler is excited when the plane actually touches down and lands and they clap their hands and get kind of happy and stuff along with everybody else when the wheels touch down. Whatever it is, you just want to have this very vivid picture in your brain because this is what you're going to hold on to in your mind throughout the flight. And it does a couple things. Like one, it's just a thought to think about. It's something really nice to kind of keep pulling you forward. But having a good anchor thought also allows you to reinterpret the things that might otherwise be anxiety triggers for you. You're rereading the book, and I don't think I mention it in there, but I definitely mention it in my course. If you simply look at the facts of what happens to your body when you're anxious, it actually looks almost identical to the way that you feel when you're just really excited. And so for myself, I always use the example of the night before Christmas, because as a kid, I was always wired the night before Christmas. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop obsessing and thinking about what the next day was going to be like. I was just really elevated. And if I were to just kind of look at my body and the response, it probably looked very similar to, let's say, the anxiety that I felt years down the line when I was walking into a school dance and felt like I wanted to throw up, right? So they can be very, very similar in your body, and it's really your interpretation of it that's different. So when you catch yourself in the case of, your flight, interpreting these internal signals, right, the feelings in your body as signs of panic. So right now you're fearing that panic might happen. So you're going to be very hypervigilant. It's kind of a meta thing where you're kind of afraid of fear. You're anxious about anxiety. So you're going to be on the lookout for signs that you're anxious. You're like, oh God, was that a heart palpitation? Oh man, I must be panicking, right? So you're looking for that thing that you fear. Instead of taking that route with it, try instead to conjure up your anchor thought. And you can realize you're really excited for that, right? You might even try to embody that excitement and say to yourself out loud or in your head, oh my God, I'm so excited to give Mary that first big hug and see her giant smile when she picks us up. She's going to see the kid for the first time. Oh God, I can't wait, right? Just talk it out, because you're feeling so much in your body, but that could easily be excitement. Now, there's somebody called named Mel Robbins. She has some great content out there on, TikTok, YouTube, etc. But she has a really good YouTube video about this, and she talks about the anchor thought. Her anchor thought was, she's on a flight coming back home after a press tour or something like that, and her anchor thought is coming home and seeing her dog. I think her dog's name is Amigo. So opening the door and getting pummeled by her dog, and that is her anchor thought. So it's a really good one. I would check it out. Just look it up. Mel Robbins flying fear. I'll try to put a link in the show notes. But in her video, she also talks about this really, really good concept that I like, which is everything is good news. So what does this mean? When you're anxious, when you're primed to feel panicky while you're flying, you're going to take every little thing that happens as a sign of danger, right? So let's say that you're sitting in your seat and you're like, okay, I'm here. Let's just breathe through it. Okay, this is going to be just fine. Let's just breathe. Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. And suddenly you hear, because the door shut. They shut the door because they're about to actually start getting ready to take off, right? And that clunk sound, that might set you on edge. Oh God, okay, fuck it. No, I can't do this. Oh boy, I wasn't expecting that, and truthfully, there are so many different sounds and interesting things that happen before and during a flight. When you're flying, it's pretty odd to feel in your body the sense of, ascending and gaining that weightlessness. When you're turning and banking, it feels very, very strange. It might feel like you're going to fall out of the sky or crash or something like that. And there's lots of different things that happen. And if you're primed for that anxiety, you might interpret each of those things as maybe a sign of danger or just a sign of, oh, I can't handle this. So instead, with this approach, using your anchor thought, you take all of these things as good news, great news even, right? You want to get to your destination because you cannot wait for your anchor thought to happen. You can't wait to give that family member a huge hug. You can't wait to clap and cheer with your kids and see the smile on their faces when they touch down. Presumably this is their first flight. So what an amazing memory to create. So you can't wait for that to happen. But the only way to get to that anchor thought, the only way to get there is to do all of these things. The door closed. Wow, that was an interesting sound, but that's great news because that means you're one step closer to taking off. The plane is banking and it turned, which feels trippy. It feels wrong to your vestibular system, but that's great news. That's such good news because that means that you're orienting in the direction of your family and you're on your way to making that anchor dream come true, right? So there's a lot of different things and all of them are good news. There are some amazing YouTube videos out there, and I'm definitely going to link one in the show notes, but there are so many good ones of pilots actually walking you through the process. I found one that I really, really like, which is, 20, 25 minutes long, and it features a pilot that's actually recording the whole process with his phone. And he shows you things and he talks about it. So he's recording an actual flight and explaining every little interesting sound. So everything you're expecting to hear. So the hydraulic system, the engine sounds, the landing gear retracting, the flaps going up and down, even turbulence as it happens. He even goes into things like reflections and stuff that you might see while flying. And so that's a really, really great one because it gives you a very exhaustive list of things that you might encounter. Now, as a parent, I imagine that going on this flight with the kids makes you feel even more pressure to just like have your shit together. You mentioned that actually, in your question. And of course, on the other side of that, because you have that pressure, you also have more risk of panicking, right? You're like, oh, I can't do this. But I actually think having the kids could be a really unique advantage here and a way to just do a great job with the process. I'm not sure how old your oldest kid is, but I could see making this whole everything is good news concept into a game. So like if it were me and I were in this position, you can talk about it beforehand with your kid, or you could even print something out. I'm thinking almost like a bingo sheet or like a checklist where you go through a video like that and you write all those things down. Or you write landing gear retracting, you write, flaps check, you write the engine check, whatever. And, all those different sounds and sensations that would be scary, instead, they're part of the game, right? So, this thing happened. That's great. That means you're one step closer to that anchor thought. That means you're one step closer to getting to your family and friends and having a really awesome vacation. So good. I'm glad that happened. And so when they do the engine check, right, instead of just focusing on the fact that that's making your heart race, instead of figuring out how you would have to escape, so the engine starts, you're like, oh God, I need to figure out how I can get out of here. Instead, pull out the bingo sheet or the checklist and go, oh, kids, listen, you hear that? I think that was the engine check. Okay, let's check that one off. Yes, awesome. We are one step closer to seeing everybody. We're going to get a big hug so soon. I'm so excited, right? So turning it into a game, that could be really, really helpful. And I think self-talk could be very important here, out loud or in your head. Who cares if people think that you're, just talking to yourself and being like that. If you want to talk out loud, you talk out loud. But you could say like, oh, yes, finally, right? You could even say like, it's a relief. It's such good news that you're relieved about it. Finally, I thought they were never going to start accelerating down the runway. That rumble, ooh, that means we're finally starting to catch some air. That means we're going to be in the air soon. That means we're one step closer to being with the people that I love. Oh my God, I'm so excited. My body is so excited. I can feel it. So talk yourself through it in that way. Hopefully all this is making sense. So far we're talking about establishing that anchor thought, something that you're really looking forward to, learning about the signs of the good news that you're getting closer to that anchor thought, things that may have in another situation been anxiety triggers, but now they're things that you can't wait to hear or see or feel because that means you're on your way. Next, I want to talk about one thing that you can avoid. Let's try to avoid falling in the rabbit hole of what we would call safety behaviors. So one thing that anxiety does is it tries to convince you that you're in danger. Right? That's the whole point of anxiety. It's an evolutionary adaptation to keep you alive. So it helps you pick out signs of danger and then react to them in the way that's most likely to keep you alive. And then what do you do when there's imminent danger around the corner? Well, you try to preserve yourself. You try to identify escapes. You try to research to prove that the risk is low. You try to profile people so you can know that there's nothing sketchy going on, that nobody's going to try to take over your plane. Truthfully, though, those aren't useful because you're not in danger in the first place. These behaviors, they don't actually keep you more safe. They're not doing what anxiety wants you to think that they're doing. Anxiety wants you to think that they're keeping you safe, but no. The behaviors are actually just serving the purpose of reinforcing that anxiety and making it bigger. And they're not logical. They might feel very logical to you, even as I'm saying them. Some of those you might be like, well, no, that's not true. Do you think that planes would suddenly become one of the least safe modes of transportation when they've had so many years of being actually one of the safest modes of transportation? Do you think that you can profile people better than TSA and other intelligence agencies, right? Your brain is trying to solve a problem that it can't, and that's just winding you up further. Another area of that sort of safety behaviors is, drinking alcohol or taking medication, things like Xanax. These are things that I'm not going to say you're not allowed to do. Obviously, you're an adult. You're allowed to take medication that's prescribed to you. You're allowed to enjoy a drink, but be aware of the purpose, right? These can also be safety behaviors, meaning you feel like you need to feel calmer, like my body needs to get less elevated in order for this flight to work. And that's just not true. The flight could go on, like I said, you could have a 3-hour panic attack and the flight's still going to be safe. Right? So the level of your elevation and impairment, that doesn't have anything to do with the flight itself. So be careful about that. And what you want to do is try to catch yourself a bit when you're thinking these irrational thoughts or taking these safety behaviors. So if you find yourself on Google looking up news articles related to plane accidents or looking up statistics about plane safety, try to catch yourself and stop. Try to get yourself to stop doing it. It's not helping. And instead, challenge your irrational thoughts in whatever way makes sense to you. Pull out a piece of paper, talk it through with somebody, talk to yourself out loud, but just in the way that I did, challenge those irrational thoughts. And you can even use a technique that we would call like normalization cards, imagining sort of an index card, like a 3x5 index card. And what you would do is, this is a very common technique with exposure work of any capacity. But when you have some common pitfalls that are irrational thought patterns, and these lead you to those strong emotional reactions like anxiety, you can write down whatever that common thought is and bring it with you. So let's say that you can write down the thought that like, I'm going to be looking out for people that look sketchy because they might steal the plane. So you write that down on one side, and then you flip it over, and on the back side, you write your rational response to that fear. I should not profile people. There's no single way a terrorist looks. I'm not better at profiling people than the TSA. These things don't happen very often. Whatever it is that you want to write to sort of help talk yourself out of it, you can write that on there. And then also, if there's any coping strategies that are relevant to that particular thought and reaction, you can write those on there. And that's just like you're preparing for it. I always say this, that, having taken some punches in my life, it's a lot easier to take a punch when you know it's coming, right? If you get sucker punched, you can, really, really take some damage. But if you're ready for it, it might still hurt, but it's a different type of hurt and you're more prepared for that. So normalization cards, either in actual print or on your phone, those can be something that you do. And then some other things related to preparation. I think it would not be a bad idea to make sure that you have a well-practiced deep breathing strategy. So a nice deep diaphragmatic breathing strategy. Again, lots of resources out there for this. You know from my book that I love 4-7-8, meaning breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 7, exhaling for 8. And when I say counts, I mean, whatever count makes sense to you, not like a full second if that's going to be too long, but just having an interval there. Personally, myself, I've been very into what's called box breathing lately, or square breathing. There's a lot of terms for it. Very simple. Breathe in deeply for 4, hold it for 4, exhale entirely for 4. And then the special part is at the bottom of the exhale, hold it for 4 before inhaling again, right? So you in, hold, exhale, hold, inhale. Right. So like that. And you just repeat that. And that's a good, comfortable one. And it's a really, really great way to sort of help engage the other side of the nervous system. So not the sympathetic nervous system, which drives the fight or flight response, but the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps you to calm down and relax. Another good thing that's even not just like a breathing strategy, that's a longer one, but it's like, I don't know what they call it, like the double breath sigh or something like that. Basically, you take a nice deep breath in, and then before exhaling, you suck another deep breath in, and then you sigh it out. So it sounds a little like this. You go, and that feels really good. That's a really good way to just get a little bit of that stress out. So you breathe in a little bit more, and then just let it out slow. So whatever it is, any of those options, the idea is to practice it, to do these things when you're not already feeling like you're under fire, when you're at home, when you're relatively relaxed, so you can teach your body to get used to engaging that relaxation response. It's a skill, and it's something you want to become acquainted with before you go off and challenge yourself. Again, panic is not dangerous. Don't forget that. Panic is not dangerous. So even if your breathing feels like it's failing you, you're like, it's not working. It's not working. Oh my God. And you don't get any relief from it. You just get wound up. You're still going to be okay. Even if you hyperventilated to the point that you passed out, you're still going to be okay. You'll just come to and be like, whoa, what happened? But having a breathing tool, breathing strategy can be really helpful simply because when you bring things down from a 10 to a 6, it feels a lot better. You feel like you have a lot more control, which is valuable, especially when you're traveling with the kids. And on that note, you might also want to make sure that you have some good distractions prepared for you and for the kids. So like if there are movies or shows that you can download on your phone or tablet ahead of time that aren't reliant on streaming, that would be great. Same goes for books, toys, other items that you can engage with. Basically anything that's going to help point your focus and energy in a specific direction and help you pass the time, that will be great. And then when you're on the plane, there's some things that you can do as well. So one thing is to use what you might call contradictory emotions. We already talked about one of these, which is basically trying to convert anxiety into excitement, right? So instead of saying, oh my God, I'm so scared, saying, wow, I'm so excited to get there. Wow, look at my body's like so amped up. I guess I'm really excited. Another one is, you can do that with your kids. So if you're feeling amped up, you can talk to your kids about it. You can be like, oh my gosh, kids, I'm so excited. Let's bounce. Are you excited? Like, let's go, kind of get them into it as well. Humor is also another good one, right? Humor I find is a really great way to diffuse anxiety as well as things like anger. But like in your question, you mentioned that you feel a little worried about panicking on a plane because there's nowhere that you can escape. Well, good. That's great news. It's great news that you can't escape because you're never going to get to your anchor thought. You're never going to get that big hug from your family if you jump out of the fucking plane, right? That's just going to make you go splat on the ground somewhere. So good. Thank goodness you can't escape the plane, right? And sometimes when you introduce humor or some other kind of incompatible emotional response, it helps to defuse it a bit. And don't forget that you're not alone on the plane. You mentioned that it feels very scary to sort of be on your own and have to have it all together. But truthfully, you're not alone. You have the flight crew. There are even other passengers around you. They're not always assholes. Sometimes passengers can be great helps. And if you're needing help or you're feeling nervous about the kids, feel free to talk to somebody. That could be ahead of time or during the flight, right? So like imagine the flight crew coming through, checking on everybody, offering drinks or whatever they're doing, and they ask you how you're doing. Rather than saying, yeah, we're good, fine, thanks. Maybe you could be honest. Be like, seriously, I'm barely holding it together. I'm just so anxious for some reason. And I feel so bad for the kids. I'm a total mess. And that would be a fantastic way to get them on your side, right? Maybe they offer you something to drink or an extra little snack. Maybe they find something silly like little, memorabilia, caps or something for the kids to play with, whatever it might be. Maybe they can do something, or maybe it's simply that they make an effort to come by more often to offer you some encouragement. Who knows? But it's not just like you and your anxiety versus the world. You aren't alone, and you're allowed to be anxious. You're allowed to ask for help with that. Last thing I'll say is take some time to focus on just how awesome you are and how badass you are for even considering this. It sounds like you're taking a solo trip. I hope that that's, I'm not misinterpreting, but it sounds like it's you and the kids. And if so, like you absolutely get to have bragging rights when you finish this because, people are going to be like, wow, I can't imagine 2 young kids. You did it by yourself. How'd you do that? Damn right? They should be saying that. You're a boss. You did it and you did it while you're anxious. So that's amazing. And just remember that you get to definitely have some brownie points for that. Similar to your anchor thought, you might think about how you're going to feel once the trip is all over, how proud you can be and how beneficial the trip was to you. Just imagine yourself, visually in your bed, imagine yourself just laying there, smiling to yourself because you're proud. I'm thinking the end of a 90s rom-com, where they're always just sort of smiling at their own thoughts, right? Imagine that. You did that shit. So I hope this is helpful to you. Like I said, there are tons of resources out there. Let's try to make sure that you're going along with the good ones, not finding things to wind yourself up, but finding things that are going to help you, like this podcast and the other resources I mentioned. These are some great tips to start with, but definitely feel free to keep looking for resources and, sources of encouragement. I believe in you. You got this. And I hope it's a really, really good trip. And that's it. That's the end of the episode. What are we at? About coming up on half an hour here. So I guess not that short. But thank you for listening. Hopefully this was applicable to you. And if you're searching and finding this years down the line, I hope it helps. Thank you for listening. This has been episode 368 of the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. If you'd like to see the show notes, including links, go to duffthepsych.com/episode 368. And if you want to send me a question for a future episode, send me an email to duffthepsych@gmail.com or use the contact form at duffthepsych.com. All right, guys, take care of yourselves. I will see you for the next episode. Bye.